I'm Michael Matthews, the Improv GM, and today we're going to talk about how to shape a campaign. It's a very common thing for people to sit down, for a GM to sit down and create this massive overarching campaign that'll have all these different things, that there's this massive big bad at the end that the characters have to go for, that is essentially shaped on a Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones style. There's going to be a big ass thing happening that you're going to eventually work towards that is like never in the future. A lot of people make these campaigns and they never get to the end of it. Partly because they're looking so far down the road that if they have a gaming group that they know is going to be together for a long time, that they'll be able to get together every week, that they won't get bored and want to try something else. And that's a lot of variables to hang your campaign on. It's also way more work than you need to do to start off. So the thing is, the way I shape campaigns tends to work partly because I don't do a lot of shaping to begin with. I start off with an inciting incident. Here's a basic thing that we're going to be trying to go to maybe 4 sessions down the road. Fairly quickly, this is the thing we're probably going to be aiming towards. Like for example, with Legends of the Wulin, I have used you're avenging your family's death at the hand, or your village's death at the hands of a specific member of the Black Lotus. So in that case, they have a concrete objective that is short term, that's kind of good to learn how the game works, to discover the characters and play with them in a situation where the characters all have a reason to be going in a single direction. So I have an inciting incident. I maybe have some factions and figure out what they're doing in the world. I throw in some NPCs, have got some other stuff ready to go, but that's as far as I start. I found that, especially as you get older, like time becomes a problem. My home group is mostly people from theater that I work with, and when we get shows in there, like we will not be able to play for a while. It's easy to lose the thread. But what I found works even with more consistent groups, like a couple of the ones I've run with online. One of the other problems with trying to plan way in the future, you don't know if your characters are going to actually find it interesting. Maybe your players just don't really care that much about grabbing the ring and throwing it in the volcano. Maybe that's not the thing that they get into. Maybe they have much more of an interest in, we dealt with this city-state, and we like the people there, and we kind of want to see what happens through there. By forcing them into a thing that they're not really necessarily interested in, you end up with players who start to get bored because they don't have a reason to want to keep going. So one of the best things is you're throwing out these threads and characters and other possibilities that they can grab onto. See what they grab onto. I've literally had to tell my players sometimes, look, I know that this is sort of going towards this, so we'll use the Black Lotus example. We're going towards destroying the Scorpion, a member of the Black Lotus, but if you find this more interesting, you're not hopping off of a train that has been set in motion. There is a world in front of you. We will, because that's something that's important to your characters, it will work its way into the thing that you're more interested in. But if you decide this other thing is more interesting, we're going to go with that. We're going to let them chase that, and then what happens is they start to kind of build things for you because they'll have interests. They will want a specific thing here. Oh, I want to do this. I want to do this thing now. And you can actually let your players start to point your campaign where they want to go, as opposed to you having to sit there and go, okay, here's where I want them to go. I don't do that because if I were to do that, I might as well be the person writing the book in the corner, because if I want them to get you this will happen, then you'll do this, then you're going to end up over here in this part of the country, and then you're going to come into contact with this evil necromancer. Write your book. That's not where the players want to go. When they feel like they have the freedom to go after things, my discovery has been, they'll go after things. They'll decide what it is their characters find interesting. And then at that point, you are essentially laying down the tracks in front of them while they're aiming the train wherever they want to go. You're not railroading, you're just and you may need to do a little bit here and there and figure out, okay, they're going to head across to this other city. What's going to happen there? Who's there? What are the things we can figure out once we get there? So, they like an NPC, make them important, or make them reoccurring. ask them what they want. Like, what kind of things seem interesting to you is an awesome question to ask at the end of a session. Okay, so at this point, you've gone through, you've split the city between these two various groups. You have become this important kind of key player. What are some things you think you want to look into? You're asking them going, what is your character going to want to do, so you can actually get some stuff ready for them and maybe throw in some threads so that they have got a place to go. The whole thing, it allows you to become surprised. They get to discover things that feel much more like it comes out of their inputs. It's not the Telltale video game where, well, I get to ask these different questions, but it doesn't matter. This has to end the same way, which works in the moment, but if you kind of go back and look at it, it starts to feel kind of cheap. But, I mean, when it comes to a video game, part of the impossibility is you can't really write for a character who decides, screw this main idea of the story, I'm going to go way off on this other tangent. In role-playing games, that's where I find things get super interesting. Don't make it a single-issue campaign. Don't make it something where this is the one quest we're trying to do. The quest storyline for campaigns, in my opinion, I don't like it. It's not for me, partly because it hooks us into a very specific framework where the characters are trying to accomplish just one thing, and it's less messy than how people are in real life. When the players have decided this is what we want to accomplish, that's awesome. I love that for long-term campaigns. They've given themselves the quest as opposed to the GM going, I've handed you this little MacGuffin, now use this to go over there and destroy the big bad. So, develop these things, put in a bunch of different threads. The way I always look at it is, you've got a bunch of threads going through. There's often a bigger one, a main one that the characters are following, but don't stay with that every single session. Have your off sessions where this little thing kind of comes in and worms its way in and shows itself to somehow be maybe connected tangentially, but it's also got its own other thing, because occasionally your players will decide we want to go that way. Think of how often in a computer role-playing game, like you play Skyrim, how many people barrel through the main story as opposed to how many people just wander around the countryside and try to figure out what to do. I wander the countryside. I occasionally go, okay, I should probably get onto the main storyline for a little bit, but I always feel sort of like, when I have to do that, it feels like I'm doing a chore as opposed to doing the things that I want to be doing. The things that do kind of catch me, I go through, I'll rip through those. Those are rarely the main storyline. Role-playing games allow you to make the things they find interesting the main storyline. So have that like big storyline that they have discovered going through, and as you have some of the other little like threads and episodic structures going through there, the things that they really grab onto, you can start to enlarge. You can start making a little more important. These tangents that maybe for a couple sessions you end up a little bit more on this particular tangent, because that is something that they want to go through for a bit. That's something they want to explore. The cool thing about that is, if you reach the end of your campaign, and I'm not talking, 6 years from now, we're finally going to finish this thing, and they're finally going to take the ring and throw it. No, I'm talking like 4 or 5 months from now, when you have gone through, you've built the threat, all these things have happened, and you've brought yourself into the end of the storyline. It gives you a jumping off point if you want to keep going. Because it's a shape of a campaign, it implies there will be an ending. There kind of has to be. You don't necessarily know what it is when you first start, but eventually you're going to get an idea. Here's the things the characters are liking. Here's maybe the big bad or the thing that they're going to be going up against. Let them get to the point where they have seen the threat grow. They have fought back against it. They've failed some. They're working their way through until they get a satisfying victory. And honestly, for a lot of the points in my game, like the way I've learned to look at it in the last several years, end it. A lot of television shows reach the end of what is honestly their good ideas, and then they keep going. They may find it again. I mean, I enjoyed Supernatural, but they got to the point that you could kind of tell this was the ending they were going for. It ended with one of them in hell sacrificing himself. I know that's happened a bunch since. And I was watching it after that, and I was seeing them fumble to try to find something that actually would work as well as the first several seasons. And the season with the Leviathans, I kind of ended up giving up. I was told it got better, but they were treading water for a while. And in a role playing game, I find treading water to be dreadfully boring. If I've got other big threads from the leap on, we can go with those. Occasionally, everything starts to barrel its way with a lot of momentum towards that ending, and the other threads get kind of tossed away. I had a Masks game where they finally went up against the big bad. They brought the entire city together because they basically had all the villains doing all these attacks, take care of the main heroes. So in Masks, you play teenage superheroes. So I did the was it No Man's Land, the Batman, where they broke Batman by releasing everyone from Arkham Asylum. I took that idea and I put it in this game, and we got to the point where they finally beat this big bad and this big climactic thing where they had brought all the junior superheroes of the city together, and we were done. There really wasn't particularly good things to jump onto from there. I mean, we tried switching systems because the characters had kind of outgrown the system itself because they had now become sort of so well known and powerful. Nobody was going to doubt them, and that's a big part of what that game is about. So we tried to switch systems. It didn't work because it felt like we were treading water and not finding the thing. I think partly because I felt like we were done. It felt like we had their story and wanted to keep going. They wanted to keep going with the characters, but I wanted to maybe try to come back after a while. Try something else for a bit, then see about coming back. Partly because you have so much momentum for so long, you reach that ending, you're gonna just be dicking around and trying to figure out what to do for a bit. And at the beginning of a campaign, when there feels like there's lots of possibilities, that's kind of one thing, is you're exploring and stretching. Well, now you've explored, you've stretched, maybe you've had your big hero moment. Try something else. Sometimes you'll have storylines that actually are going through that feel like, okay, once this thing, like we know we're reaching a climax here, but there's this other thing that's been developing. Like my Unknown Armies game, they went through, they got this guy, his husband back, like one of the main characters, because his husband had been forced through this room of enunciation that changes who you are. We finally work our way up that whole thing, and that actually started off just one, like a Scooby-Doo game, where they just wandered small town America playing music and running into weirdness. And then a couple things came up that were interesting that the characters grabbed onto, and then we started going with that, and then we added a new player who, this thing about my husband, we worked into these other things, and we started to get more focused, and it happened naturally. As they started to get information, all of the characters started to come kind of behind it, but we also had a side plot where this character who is a avatar of the star, who wants to basically be like the biggest star in the world, was probably going to be coming head to head with Beyonce, and it already had who's like the Godwalker or like the most powerful star on Earth. It was going to come down to sort of something between them, and then she decided when they got there that she wasn't supposed to be the Godwalker. She was supposed to be number two. And she was okay with that. And then another character who had gotten like this huge charge decided he was going to take this forgetfulness of a place that they had been early on and basically use this massive amount of power he'd been to tie it into all the stuff that they had done, so that they kind of became forgotten by the people who might have wanted to come after them. And it really felt at one point while we're going through the what we thought was going to be like the climax of this part of the story and the beginning of the next, I'm like, guys, this feels like an epilogue. This feels like we're putting this game to bed, and everyone agreed that this felt like the end. So we let it have an end, and it was awesome. It was a great place to go where we put that whole thing to bed. They each had their little their moments where they got to show here's what's happening sort of after, and those characters are now living their life in a world that no longer exists unless we go back to it. And we may go back to it at some point, but I think it's important to then jump off into something else because they've decided the things that they originally were into was what they weren't going into. The campaign took its own shape when if you had asked us all maybe an hour before that final game that was supposed to be epilogue of like the first big part and then jumping into the second one, we all probably would have thought, yeah, we go from here to dealing with the fact that the whole bunch of stuff had happened, and they're deal with the police, which they had done before in some different places, and we just, nope, this is not how this campaign is shaped. So we ended it, and we're starting something new. Honor the way your campaign wants to be shaped, because when you come together with a bunch of people, and this is something that happens in improv a lot, you create a thing between you that it's alive in the same way that when authors talk about this character wouldn't do the thing I wanted to. When you fight too much against the momentum of what you've created, it kills it. It causes a lot of problems. And in role-playing games, we have ways of ignoring a long enough combat sequence. You're going to kind of start forgetting that, yeah, the place in between those has been a little bit of a lull. Honor that nature of the campaign. So again, don't start off huge. Don't write yourself a novel. Get yourself, here's a thing to start us off. Here's a powder keg to blow up to get us moving across space and get the characters doing something. And then throw threads in and essentially let the players start to wrap up the ones that they're interested in, throw away the ones that they don't, start working in a few more, and then follow that until it reaches the place where it's going to land. If you do all this right, you actually can have quite a few really awesome campaigns, as opposed to a whole bunch of campaigns that kind of, they start really big and then just sputter. Because we all have those things that sputter, and it gets a little old. So, hope it'll work for you. If you like this, go ahead, like down below and subscribe. Share it. If you've got any questions, leave a question down there. And if you want to do the 8-minute story challenge, where I go through with a song that you've put in a genre and then create essentially this sort of campaign beginning for you, that is also one of the things that I have on my account. So until later, I'm Michael Matthews. Thank you very much.